Welcome to the Child Lab at Texas Christian University. Today we're going to talk about a new paper that's out helping us think about how children who speak using AAC build and organize their vocabularies. And we're joined by Dr. Courtney Trevino, the first author of our lab's new publication in the Journal of Communication Disorder. So, Courtney, your study is one of the first to look at taxonomic knowledge in children with intellectual and developmental disabilities who use AAC. For our listeners who might not be familiar, what exactly is taxonomic knowledge and why is it such an important piece of understanding vocabulary development in AAC users?
Yeah, great question. So taxonomy, I like to just say it, I like to talk about it as sort of a fancy word for category knowledge, right? We categorize nouns specifically, overarching categories. So think like animals, and then into basic level terms. So think like the word dog, and then into more specific level terms. Think like German Shepherd or Corgi. This is important because we store words in our brains using like a network. So we have this network of words, and words are stored through connections to other words, specifically these categorical connections. And so when children have great categorical knowledge, or taxonomic knowledge that we would expect at their developmental age, they can store these words effectively in their brains, which then allows them to recall those words and use them in conversation efficiently. So that's one piece of the pie. I think on the other side, the more understanding, the better taxonomic understanding that you have, that then can also help you learn words. So say you understand the word animal and you understand the word dog, then when you're introduced to the word corgi and you learn that a corgi is a dog, then you understand that a corgi is an animal. You understand that a corgi, again, is a type of dog. You understand that this thing is not a plant. It's not it's not any of these other categories. So it helps you understand what is and is not a referent for a word. And then it helps you store that word long-term in your brains. I'm interested in that with this population. It's not something that has been considered in the literature. It's been touched on in a couple different articles, but not necessarily like comprehensively looked at. I'm interested in that with this population because they do, kids who use AAC do struggle to learn words at a rapid rate. We've seen in different articles that many children who use AAC are stuck learning less than 30-ish words. Some obviously exceed that, some don't quite hit 30. And so, in an effort to look for some solutions to a problem that exists for some of our kids who use AAC, I am interested in how taxonomy plays into this, and what their word storage systems might look like.
Cool. So it sounds like for clinicians, then keeping taxonomy on your mind when you're choosing words or when you're looking at why a child isn't learning words could be really important, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's interesting even more so when you get into the AAC world, because a lot of these systems are organized using categories or using taxonomy. So on Lamp Words for Life is going to be the example that I use. I know if you want to say the word elephant, you have to go to the dog first. And so dog and elephant are both like those basic level terms that I talked about. And so if a child has that understanding and that connection in their brain, the first selection, right, if they're just searching for the word elephant, the first selection is likely going to be dog over some of our other options. At least theoretically, that makes sense. That's something that we've tested. But if a child doesn't have any understanding of the relationship between those two words, then literally finding words on their system might be more difficult. And so it's an interesting question with this population.
It sounds like it could lead to a Matthew effect where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even for children who don't speak using an AAC device, but for children who do speak using an AAC device, maybe it would be magnified.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm good at categories and I have good receptive
Mm-hmm.
understanding of categories, it might actually be easier for me to learn words on the device.
Right.
But if I'm not good at categories, then that makes it even harder for me to learn words on the device.
Mm-hmm.
And would you say this is true of children, regardless of whether they speak through a device, that category knowledge and taxonomic knowledge maybe influences what words you're going to learn easily versus not?
Yeah, there are studies out there right now. Some are super in depth looking into what word are you most likely to learn next, which is very complex but a very interesting question. And oftentimes those words do have those sort of relationships. If you know this word and this word, you're likely to learn pretty quickly a word that's somewhere related in the middle, between those two words. And I would say, yeah, that's not something that people are exploring yet in the AAC world that at least I have seen. It would be a really fun and interesting place to head. Not quite there yet in my work.
Okay, so let's talk about kind of some of the issues that you address in this specific paper. Your paper highlights that there's this ongoing debate, at least
Mm-hmm.
in the research, focusing on core vocabulary versus developmental vocabulary
Mm-hmm.
and early AAC intervention. How do your findings contribute to that conversation? And what do you think about that debate?
Yeah, great question. That is an ongoing debate. I know in the practice world, having lived in the practice world for a long time, core vocabulary is the hot topic, I guess I would say right now. It's what we're all teaching to kids in the clinic world. There's a lot of and so for anybody who might not be familiar, core vocabulary is some of the most commonly used words in the English language, and then core vocabularies are being researched in other languages as well. Examples in the English language might be the words have, want, more, go, play, like some of these highly commonly used words. The interesting piece about that, though, is if you go and pull the data, those words are some of the most commonly used words by those of us who have well developed or fully developed language, but they're not necessarily early developing words. And so in 2020, Janice Light and a colleague published a paper just calling attention to that and looking at some data, not even with kids, just like data that already existed. And a couple other research groups then have sort of built onto that conversation. And so I was excited to sort of jump on the bandwagon and start to ask the question, like, it makes all the sense in the world if we're working with kids who have an AAC device and they have limited access to vocabulary words, like these devices at some point are going to limit the number of words that you have access to. It does make all the sense in the world that you would work on words that we commonly use all the time. The question, though, that is coming back and being asked, and I find this a really important question, is does that allow for development? So if we are teaching words outside of development, outside of what we see typically with children who progress through developmental phases, are these kids going to be able to learn go and want and like and more and play before they learn dog and ball and baby and some of these other more concrete concepts that are might be a little bit easier to acquire? So that's a little bit around the debate. This paper is like a very early step in trying to get at that question and trying to understand really processes of vocabulary development with this population. Once we can get an understanding of how children who use AAC learn words, then we can come back and understand, well, what words should we be learning? So I'm excited to see where it heads. I am curious. One day I would love to get to a study that looks at um, both both types of words. Like if we teach children both types of words, is one group going to make quicker progress than the other? What kinds of differences in their word storage systems in their brains are we going to see? I think there's a million questions to be asked. So
And
I'm
it
laying the
seems like this
groundwork.
is almost a chicken or an egg issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're picking words that children are going to have access to,
Mm-hmm.
then we need to think about things like taxonomy and what words they should learn. But by picking the words that children are going to have access to,
Mm-hmm.
we may be impeding their learning or
Right.
facilitating their learning.
Right.
And it just seems like all of the different processes would feed each other.
Right. Yeah, couldn't agree more. An interesting problem, I think, that is unique to a population who is given essentially an inventory of words that they can use versus other populations who are acquiring words and then speaking them out loud without a grid size, like a set inventory of available words sitting in front of them. So,
and that's one of the coolest things about language is that it's generative.
mm-hmm.
And so if we pre-limit the words you're able to use, it seems like that would limit the generativity of language.
Right.
So I can make up a word. If I don't have a word that seems to make sense, I can put little pieces of words together.
Right.
And come up with weird words or words that people use that don't even have meaning but start to have social meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of, I have a middle schooler, 6'7" is everywhere right now,
Yeah.
and everybody's laughing about that.
Yeah.
But if I've pre-selected the words that you can laugh about or that you can put
mm-hmm.
together, then all of a sudden there are things we can't participate in. And so this really matters.
Right. Yeah, and it's an interesting problem because a pre-selected set of words is better than no words, right? And I don't know how all of that will interplay. I'm interested to see how advancements in technology and just the boom that is happening with AI and potential future I don't know, endeavors might change how this looks. I don't think we know what the face of AAC looks like in 10 years or in 20 years. So we'll see where all of that heads. But yeah, as it stands today, this is an interesting component related to the development of children the language development of children who use these systems.
Cool.
Yeah.
So this study involved 3 experiments comparing children with AAC to age-matched, vocabulary-matched, and IQ-matched peers.
Mm-hmm.
What was the most surprising or illuminating pattern that you found when you looked at these comparisons?
Yeah. So we did a quick taxonomic task. I asked kids to, I laid pictures in front of children and I said, give me, and then I said words at different taxonomic levels. So going back to my original example, corgi, dog, and animal, although that was not one of the things that we did, but that's right, an example of
mm-hmm.
what the task looked like. And then we did that with children who use AAC. We did that with peers who were the same age as all of those kids. We did that with peers who had the same receptive vocabulary size as that group. And then we split the AAC group in half. Half had an IQ above 70 and half had an IQ at and below 70. We recruited some additional IQ matched peers who speak. They don't use AAC devices. And their IQs matched the group that had an IQ below 70 that did use AAC devices. So that was that third study. I thought it was really interesting that the receptive vocabulary group and the AAC group performed similarly at the superordinate or like the big overarching category level. So when it came to like hand me animals, hand me plants, like these big categories, they performed pretty similarly, but then we did see differences at the basic and subordinate levels. What that tells me is that something else is coming into play here. They didn't perform similarly to other children who have a similar vocabulary size. And so in that sense, vocabulary is not the only thing playing into taxonomic knowledge for the AAC group. Like there's something else here in the mix.
So it's not that they just don't have enough words.
Right.
Something they're else, missing something about the categories.
Right. That children who have the same vocabulary size as them, they're not missing that piece. So, we're still getting into the weeds of what all of that could be. I do think another thing that was very interesting was children who use AAC did seem, across all of the analyses, did seem to especially struggle at what we call the subordinate level or the more specific terms. So like corgi and German Shepherd and like those, Rose and Daisy, those more specific terms going into their AAC devices. This is now a hypothesis. We didn't prove this. This is just a thought, but I guess we didn't see this in our data, but this is just a thought. I am wondering, because a lot of those subordinate or those specific terms are not on their AAC devices. Mm-hmm. So they don't ever get to have practice or exposure or accidentally select those words. And I'm wondering if that might play into this somehow, that corgi and German Shepherd aren't on there. And so they're not getting into the weeds of this, dog category, right?
And it really speaks to
Yeah.
the difference between receptive and expressive language,
Hmm.
too, because if I'm the parent of a child who speaks using AAC, I might use the term German Shepherd,
Hmm.
and the child might receive that term receptively. But if my child never has the opportunity to practice saying that word,
Hmm.
that says something to us
Right.
about how much it matters, even on a device, that I get to produce the word and own the word.
Hmm.
And
And make mistakes and then learn from those mistakes, right? The whole trial
mhm,
and error of language.
right.
Yeah.
So there's something about the back and forth that's maybe important that we need to be thinking about when this
Hmm.
technology is created. And
Yeah.
it's not just that child will be fine because there's input. We
Hmm.
also need to really take ownership of what we give them access to for output.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So again, that's we didn't necessarily have the data to find that, but it was a that difference again at that super or at that subordinate level, that like more specific level that we saw, um, definite differences that sort of prompted that question or that observation. So I thought that
Makes
was
sense.
interesting. Yeah.
So, one of your conclusions was that differences in taxonomic knowledge might affect how children navigate AAC systems, like finding a word such as monkey under the dog icon.
Mhm.
What might speech language pathologists or educators take away from that finding when they teach children to use AAC devices?
Yeah.
So, what's the immediate reason why we might think about what your study taught us?
I think there could be a a necessary instructional component of quite literally how to use the system while you are learning words. And this is actually something that I studied in another study that I completed in that article. I think also just recently came out. And so maybe we can talk about that another time. But I think it would be useful if children who use AAC might be struggling with taxonomy or categories, and these devices are organized categorically, then I think it would be helpful to like very saliently highlight how to find words on the system. And so in this other study that we did, and this was successful in that study, we highlighted, okay, if you want to say the word monkey, first you have to touch the dog, then come all the way up here and touch the zoo animals. There's the monkey, touch the monkey. Yay, good job. And we repeated that pathway consistently out loud, right? If I first find the monkey, then find the, and I think the consistent repetition of how to locate those images to find that word, um, at least in the early data that we have, suggests that that might be very helpful for this population. I think theoretically it makes all the sense in the world. If they're struggling to find the categories, let's help them locate the categories.
Absolutely. And it sounds like,
Navigate.
too, even just the data from this study would indicate to us as clinicians that we can't assume knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
That even though it's logical to me to group all the animals together under
Mm-hmm.
one category, if the child doesn't have that category
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, then that makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got a big filing system mess of
Mm-hmm.
where to find words.
And the matches within the categories are unique too. Again, I'm just coming back to LAMP, that just happens to be the system that we're discussing today, or that I'm using as an example today. But perhaps an image of a bunch of animals might indicate animals are here, right? But
Mm-hmm.
just the image of a dog might be a little bit confusing, when in some of the other images there are a couple of other animals. And so again, just helping to highlight this is how it works in this particular system. If you want to find monkey, you do have to come here to the dog first. Monkey and dog are related. Uh, yeah, I think that would be my immediate clinical takeaway from here.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, this paper is a first step towards understanding how children who use AAC develop vocabulary and organize their mental lexicons. What are the next steps for your lab and your line of work in this research? And how would students who are interested in this kind of thing get involved if we have students looking to be involved in a research lab or
Mhm.
thinking about an undergraduate or master's in speech pathology? Where would they go from here?
Great questions. Next steps, I am interested. This first study included children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We had children with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. We did not include children with autism in this study. So, my next step here would be to repeat this study with children with the autistic population and see how things might look different, how they might look similar, what different taxonomic or categorical knowledge this group might have, and how that, long term would apply clinically. As far as students getting involved, there are so many opportunities within this lab to get involved. So undergrad students come and they volunteer and do work in our labs. Sometimes they come help us collect data. Sometimes they help us manage the data. And there's a lot of different opportunities to get the experiences that you're interested in. It's also just a cool community of other people who are interested in, sciencey research, speech, language type things. So it's a good place to get involved. And I think it's helpful for resumes and career building and things like that. As far as master's students, there are graduate assistants who work in the lab, and it's part of their commitment to be here as a student at TCU, and it helps support them attending here at TCU. And so it's this mutually beneficial relationship, and those students get to do a lot of the same fun activities as well. So whatever you're interested in, we do try and get you in something that you think is fun. And yeah, all the students are welcome. We love to have students on board.
All great things. Thank you for
Thanks for inviting
sharing
me.
with us about your study, and thank you for joining us for this conversation with Dr. Courtney Trevino. You can find the full article, Taxonomic Knowledge in Children with Intellectual and/or Developmental Disabilities Who Use AAC, in the Journal of Communication Disorders.